Louis Armstrong on the Ed Sullivan Show, it reached me in a way that I hadn't been touched before. Something about the man, his playing, his energy, his personality, his spirit. I wanted to climb through the screen, go up on stage, be part of that. That was my introduction to jazz. You could hear a lot of music from the big band era on live TV in the mid to late 50s, because it was only a decade before that big bands ruled. By the 50s, rock and roll and Elvis, that started to make inroads, and as we know, popular music changed greatly. But mid to late 50s were kind of on the end of the Great American Songbook era, so to speak. Broadway shows and movies with music, and that's on TV from New York and then later on in Hollywood. So seeing some jazz on TV was possible. And then 1959, a big year in music, certainly, with the release of Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, a number of other recordings that year. My parents purchased their first hi-fi system, and 2 recordings went along with that purchase. The Broadway soundtrack, My Fair Lady, and Duke Ellington plays the Nutcracker Suite. Now, I knew the Nutcracker Suite. It was a holiday staple. Every season you might see it on TV. Or in the late 50s and early 60s, there were a lot of music education programs in schools. Certainly my school, my elementary school, there were annual Christmas concerts of performances by bands, orchestras, choirs. Even when our 4th or 5th grade, we started doing that. So I knew the Nutcracker Suite. And I had no idea who Duke Ellington was. I put the record on. I guess that must have been 9 or 10 years old. And since I knew the music, I knew that this was a different interpretation of the music. Now, my music education was not that sophisticated. Nevertheless, I did watch young people's concerts with Leonard Bernstein. And Lenny was a great explainer, and I learned a lot about music from that. So I knew that this was not the Nutcracker Suite that I knew. It was an interpretation of it, something different. And I began to listen to each section of it. Ellington's arrangements. It was Billy Strayhorn's arrangements as well. Incredible Ellington band at that time. I still listen to that record with great reverence. That's like a lot of Duke Ellington recordings, something very unique. How he was able to take Tchaikovsky's music and put it in an entirely different context. And one thing that Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn did when they wrote for the band was to write for the individual instrumentalists. And many of the tracks feature Paul Gonsalves or Jimmy Hamilton on clarinet or Ray Nance on violin. Very distinct voices that were in the Ellington band. And even to my uneducated ears, that music spoke to me. I mean, this is something I've been listening to now for 60 years. And it still speaks to me. I highly recommend that you check it out. Duke Ellington, Nutcracker Suite.
Now, like the people's people. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Columbia Records presents Playback. Your guest, Duke Ellington. Your host, Goddard Lieberson.
And don't go away too far.
But anyway, what is this about you and Tchaikovsky? Because that's what you were playing before. The march by Tchaikovsky from the Nutcracker Suite.
Yeah, well, I thought that Tchaikovsky to Strayhorn to Ellington might be a pretty good parlay.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's going to be a good parlay, but I know this, that if Tchaikovsky were around and had a band, he'd be playing Ellington, probably.
Oh.
But what we want to hear now is Ellington playing Tchaikovsky.
That's our cue, man. Go on.
The sound of jazz. Duke Ellington and his orchestra in an exciting new version of Tchaikovsky's classic, The Nutcracker Suite.